We're getting ready to gear up for next year's sessions. I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to go back to basics again. So I'm going to talk about basic table, basic defines, expressions. And that's to keep things in line because my understanding is we're going to focus on training and education. So you can look forward to that for sometime during the next year. You want to add anything, Greg?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to be going over a change data capture, slowly changing dimensions. It's some functionality that if any of you guys are maintaining data warehouses or is a subject you're probably quite interested in.
Good. And then next year we'll have Renee coming back to do more of the designer things, which I know you guys all like. So I'm going to kick it off by talking about what happens when you run a procedure, or I'm calling it behind the scenes. For you younger generation, BTS. All right. So when you run a report, it goes through a certain number of steps from when you hit the run button to when you, oh, I'm sharing, right? Greg, I'm still sharing, right?
Yes, sorry.
All right, thank you. Until you actually get your report data back in the output that you asked it for. So we basically break it out into the analysis phase, the data retrieval phase, the matrix. For those of you who have used the product for a while, that's also known as folk sort, and then the output. So during data retrieval, we're going to retrieve the data, calculate defines, and do anywhere if screening, because if we don't need the record, we might as well throw it out as soon as we can. In the matrix, this is where we do the sorting, the aggregation, and any prefix operators that you're doing in your query. And then lastly, after the matrix is generated, then we'll calculate the computed values because they use the aggregated values, any total screenings and any total sorts that you're doing. And then the very last thing we do is the formatting and the creation of the output file, whether it's to a styled report or to a data file. All right, so first thing you do, you hit run. Focus engine basically says, okay, well, what are you doing? So it has to read your request. So it reads the request line by line, parses it, breaks it down into what it thinks that you're trying to do. If you looked at traces, you would see all of this happening. You'll see that you're doing a print or whatever your verb is, all your verb objects, and we build these things called trees. So the tree will show you, I'm taking this field, and this is what I'm doing with it. If you have any expressions, you'll see all the components of the expressions. So all that happens in the parse stage. We also identify, as we're parsing, any master files that you're accessing in your request. So if I have table file car, it says, oh, you have a car, and it's in a table file, so I need to see if you have a master. So it's going to go out, find the master, and parse the master. And if you have a multi-segmented hierarchical data structure like car, then we build out a tree structure again. So you have your root, and then you have the child under root, and then any subchildren under those. If you have an MFD profile specified in your master, in your synonym, we will also run that. And lastly, if you have DBA in your master, we check to make sure that the user that's set in your session has a rule set up in the DBA file. After everything's parsed and looks good, then we determine the IO access module required. And this is based on the suffix in the synonym. So suffix equals folk, focus database, SQL Aura, Oracle relational, things like that. Why do we need to know that? Because a focus managed access is going to be a lot different than relational managed access. Okay. This next part talks about activating segments. So this is when you have a cluster synonym where you have one synonym that has multiple segments in it with different hierarchies. So what we will do is we will activate the path needed to get to the data that you're accessing. So that's what this line says. Smallest subtree which contains the root and every segment referenced directly or indirectly. So if I'm doing car and I do country and model, well, country is the root, and then we have car as a child of country, and then we have model as a child of car. So if I only refer in my query car and model and never mention the field in car, then I still need to go through car in order to get to model. So that's where we go through the smallest subtree structure. There are other segments after car or after model, but we don't need to access those unless we reference them in our request. So we try to make things as efficient as possible. Note there's in the parentheses heading, parent, and grandchild. I'm sorry. Every segment referenced directly or indirectly. Indirectly would be is if you mention a field in a heading or subhead or subfoot or footing, even though it's not a verb object, it will be treated as a verb object. So you didn't really explicitly say print this value, but because you used it, it's going to show up and affect how we get to the path. We're going to activate the fields. So once we get the path identified, then we're going to say, okay, well, these are the fields I need from that path. And this will be all your real fields and all your defined fields. We're going to check to see that we have access to data. So you have access to data if it's a focused database, because we're going to look in the app directory that you're referencing it in, or we're going to look for a use list, or we're going to look for if you have a file def or a dynamic. At one point, we used to give you a message saying that your file wasn't allocated when you tried to do a table file. Nowadays, we just say you get 0 records back. So just be careful of that. Okay, we got everything in order. We parsed the procedure. We're parsing the master. Now we have everything in order. We can go ahead and open and verify the files. We open the file, we read a record. First thing we're going to do is we're going to perform an if-where test on the database fields. These are what we call the real fields. And it happens row by row, record by record. If it passes, then we go on to the next step. Defined fields are evaluated if needed. So we will only evaluate a defined field if you use it in your table request. So I could have a define that has 100 defines in it, 100 expressions, 100 different fields. But if I only use 2 of them, I only really need to evaluate those 2 that I'm using. So I don't know if you've seen when you're writing code, if you do a define, your define expression has an error, but you still get your output of your report. Well, that's probably because one of your define expressions had some sort of syntax error, but you never actually used that field in the request. So if you look at the view source, you'll see, oh, I have an error, but because you didn't physically use it, it didn't hurt anything. Once we calculate the defined fields, then we go back and recalculate if and where tests only on the defined field. Okay, this is very important because if you're looking for efficiency and it's a focused database or it's a flat file, so I'm talking non-relational right now, if you can get rid of the row or the record based on a database field, it's going to happen at this first step. But if you're doing your where if test on a defined field, you're going to have to do the initial if where on the real database fields, calculate the define, and then go ahead and see if you can keep it or not based on the defined value. So if you're doing millions of rows, it's better to get rid of it in the first step before you do any defined processing. Relational is a little different because a lot of the expressions will translate into the select statement, So the relational database engine will handle it at that point. Speaking of the SQL interface, we will convert your focus request into SQL, into a select statement if you're doing it for a table. We will try to optimize the join, the selection, and the aggregation, and any defined fields using new simplified user functions. A lot of the functions now will translate. There's still a few that won't. But if I can't translate a function into SQL, what we will do is bring the raw data back, and then Focus will do the calculation. It says define fields for including new simplified functions because all of the simplified functions will be translated. Whatever is not optimized is done in Focus and Web Focus. If I can't pass the join, I'll bring back table 1 data, table 2 data. Focus will do the join. The result set of your select statement will then basically become the internal matrix, the folk sort. All right, so in the folk sort, the internal matrix, we get 1 row for each distinct combination of sort keys, 1 column for each verb object, any computed columns, row and column totals, subtotals, and summaries. They're not done until after the matrix is created. All data is an internal format, and if you do a hold format datrec, then you basically will see what the internal matrix looks like. Okay, verb objects are in the matrix, and for both sum and count. Sum and count are then calculated. Fields following a verb are included. Fields used in a compute, notice not previously mentioned. So if I have sum dealer cost, retail cost, and I compute profit as retail cost minus dealer cost, the retail cost, dealer cost will only be added to the matrix the 1 time because you reference it as a verb object. Any fields used in headings, footings, subhead, subfeed. Missing fields are not counted. All your sort objects are going to be there, all your by fields, your across fields. Notice as far as an internal matrix is concerned, an across field is treated as a low by sort order. And if you're doing printer list, you're going to get an additional field of folk list. So the next couple of bullets show conceptually what happens. It might not be exactly how it happens nowadays, but it gives you an idea of what's happening behind the scenes. So aggregation is performed as a record is sorted. So I read a record, I sort it. If I'm doing any aggregation, I'll add up the values as we add each new record. Numeric fields are added, and if you're summing, alpha fields will retain the last value that it sees. So think of it, if you're adding an alpha field, you're just going to overlay the current value over the previous values. All verb objects are also counted. And this is showing output stage. So we talked about, we read the record, we did pre-processing, we parsed the folk exec, we parsed the masters. We started building the internal matrix, and then this is what happens after the internal matrix. And there's a question, is there a command similar to print star that includes any all defines? I read some of the workarounds from Post in 2008 and was just curious if anything changed on that. I don't believe so, but let me check because that would be something that would be good to have. I want to say if I do a question mark F, I think I only see the defined fields if they're in the synonym. But let me check on that. If you could put that on the survey at the end, which I failed to mention in the beginning. At the end of the seminar, at the end of the webinar, there's going to be a survey pop up for you. If you could please fill that out, and any additional follow-up like this, I would like you to put on there. So Zeke, if you could do that, thank you. All right, so we built the internal matrix, and then the rest is we're doing a secondary sort. If I do it by total, it's going to sort the data in the internal matrix based on your buys. But then once the internal matrix is generated, we're going to resort it based on your by total, or by total, so you get more than one. Then we're going to do any where totals. So compute if where totals. And then the post matrix processing is where we get our output. If it's styled, we're going to apply the styling. And if you're just going to an extract, we're just going to go to the output file. And I think, okay, back to the original slide as a recap. And then that's it. So any other questions, comments? I hear crickets. What are the advantages of using master file versus SQL pass-through? Is there an advantage? Let's see. I wouldn't say there's an advantage.
You have the focus functions available to you if you're not doing pass-through.
Well, I could do the SQL pass-through and then do a table on the results set immediately after.
Well, that's true.
I can't do a define though, but I can do computes. Yeah, so like Greg said, if you want to take advantage of focus functions that are not native to your relational database, doing it through the synonym or through a master would make that a little easier. I would say also if you're doing it via the client, you probably want to have a master, because then you get your list of fields and you can drag and drop, which I'm not quite sure how that works in the relational world if you're doing it from a select statement. Remember, if you're doing a select, you're also going to build a temporary master file based on your answer set.
Actually, there's a really good answer to that question. It just got popped up.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh,
So it makes it agnostic. It doesn't have to be database specific. So the database specific SQL that you might need to use with an Oracle or a IBM, you wouldn't have to worry about that. It's going to be an agnostic to your database SQL.
Thanks, Bowden.
So if you change databases, you'd have to rewrite everything, or you might have to rewrite everything.
Can you put too many -run commands in your facts? You can never have too many -runs.
Even I know that.
I'm personally, I'm a minimalist, so I try not to have too many. But yeah, if you have extra -runs, it's not going to hurt anything. Good. Anything else? All right, I'm going to stop sharing, and Greg, I'll let you take it away.
See anything yet?
Yes.
You do or you don't?
I do.
Oh, okay. All right. Like Walter said, Greg Weinheimer, Data Migrator Product Manager. And what I want to go over today is change data capture and slowly changing dimensions in Data Migrator, how it works with Data Migrator. So disclaimer, architecture, not anything I'm too worried about. So what's change data capture? Change data capture, it's the ability to identify and kind of capture modifications in a database where you can just pick up those changes and transfer that data to another database like a warehouse. So instead of having to grab everything and decide what has changed and what hasn't, you just grab what has changed. And how do we do that? So with Data Migrator, what we'll do is we'll read the database logs, the journals of the archives. And the reason it says logs, journals, and archives is because depending on the database you're talking about, they call them all something different. We'll just call them logs. What we'll do to get that data from the logs is we will create a synonym, create a master file for that log table. When I don't know if some of you, most of you have probably gone with Web Focus and created synonyms from the web console. Well, one of the options in the dropdown is to create synonyms from logs. So if the log, most of the time, if you probably did that, you wouldn't see anything because maybe you're not collecting data in your logs because it's not set up for change data capture. But if it is, you'll get options to things you can to the log table, so you can basically use those as sources for your data migrator flows. So processes only rows for insert, update, and delete. Now, this will make more sense when I kind of go through the demo and you see what the synonym or what the data in the logs looks like. So it's going to we're going to take data that's been inserted, updated, or deleted from the source database table and process that into our warehouse or wherever down the chain. Server records last row process to resume. Basically, after we've processed a set of data, we kind of grab a spot marker of where we were in that database and hold on to it so we don't reprocess data that has changed. We just pick up from where we left off before. Okay, Data Migrator, what do we support? RDBMS is DB2 on Unix, ZOS, iSeries, Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, MariaDB, and Postgres. And I'm going to be actually doing my demo against Postgres. IBM, we also support it through vSAM, through user exits. Okay, change data capture. What does a synonym, a master file look like when you are having it set up for change data capture? It looks very much like any master file, except there are a few differences. You'll notice that on the left-hand side, you have these three fields: CDC Oper, CDC ID, and CDC times. CDC Oper, I had mentioned in the previous slide that we'll take care. It'll process insert, updates, and deletes. Well, CDC Oper is what operation was happened against the source table. So if it's an update, it'll have a value for an update, insert value for an insert, delete value for delete. CDC TID is the ID that the database has given that record. CDC times is the time that the timestamp that process or that action occurred. There's a lot of other information here, but the three that are the most important are here, and it's the start and CDC start. It gives us it gives the flow the starting point for reading the log records. The checkpoint save, it will give the last LUW in the checkpoint file, and checkpoint file is the location of the checkpoint file. I mentioned earlier how Data Migrator keeps track of where you are in that in the change data capture in the log files. Well, it takes place within the checkpoint file. This is what a data flow looks like for Data Migrator when it's a change data capture flow. You have a synonym, looks like any flow. In this case, it's a synonym to that log or journal or whatever. Again, we'll call it a log. One thing you'll see that's a little bit different is when you look at load options, when you're doing change data capture, you'll have a load option of change data capture. So if you select that, it's also going to populate your control column, which is usually CDC change or CDC Opera, which is what operation you want to pass on to the table downstream, which is again an update, insert, or a delete. Okay, all right. Let's going to do a little demo-ish thing where I am going to, let's see. First thing I wanted to show here is creating metadata for this. In this case, we are, oh good, it's already set up this way. By default, normally you're going to see that the object type is going to be set to tables. Go here and then table log records. So if log records exist or log tables exist, it's going to show up down here. So in this case, I created a table called car CDC, and that's what I'm going to use for the demo. And this is simply how you create it. As long as logging is set up, it'll be available here. So you'd set up logging up the same way you would for it's database specific. So if you're going to do change data capture, every database has a different way of setting it up. For Postgres, it uses what they call WAL, which is what's it, wait ahead logging or something like that. I can't remember exactly. So I've already created this because I actually was going to create the flow on the fly, and when I went through that demonstration, it took a long time. So I'm going to, it's not the flow I wanted to open, actually. It's not where I wanted to start, at least. I'm going to start with the second flow, which is the one that reads the log, and then we'll take that to a target table. So just quickly, you can sample that data. And in this case, there's nothing in the logs to be processed yet. So this log is for this table, if it comes up. For this table, the car CDC table. So if I do it from here because it's easier, run this flow. And I've got a filter in this just to process a couple records. I just want to check the log out. And yeah, processed 4 records. So it found 4 records that passed my filter. Now that's just a flow that's loading data into the table that's set up for logging. Open this guy up, and this is the log. So let's sample it again, and we'll see 5 records in here, which is kind of confusing. But any C records are really just kind of header records and spot markers. It kind of gives you the max, it gives you the highest CDC TID to use, which will go into I just drew a blank, the checkpoint file. In this case, these 4 records were all updates. I already had data in that table, so it just updated these 4 records. So again, I prefer running these from here. So if I run this, submit this, and log/log. Again, 5 records processed, but one was that C record, and it knows to discard it. So 4 records, 4 rows updated, which is what we would expect. So those guys worked. Then going back into the flow, just to make sure we shouldn't really have anything else that needs to be processed, I'm just going to sample the log again. I should get nothing back. And I get nothing back. Okay. Let's see. A couple of other things. Let's see. I had mentioned the the checkpoint file. I keep forgetting with it. But this is the checkpoint file for this, and it gives the information of basically where it is itself. It tells you the database type it's on. Uh, Basically tells you Postgres, tells you where the table is, and it gives you the checkpoint ID. It's the last record that was processed, so it knows to pick up from that point. All right. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to show for this. Let me go back to my presentation. All right. So that's change data capture. If you guys have any questions, just let me know. Throw them in the chat and we'll take a look at them. The other thing I wanted to go over, which is I won't say similar, but another thing you see a lot when you're talking data warehouses is slowly changing dimensions. So what is a slowly changing dimension? And it's really when you have dimension-like data that has certain attributes that you basically have that are going to change, but you want to keep track of the history of those changes. So slowly changing dimension kind of allows you to have your data out there and keep history at the same time. Okay, for Data Migrator, what are the column types? And our column types are surrogate key. And a surrogate key is a unique value that Data Migrator will create to identify that specific record. Logical keys, it comes from the source file, source database table, and it is what logically makes that piece of information unique. There are indicators that are the column type also, which you could have a begin date and an end date, which will basically identify the time in history that that record was valid. And there's also an activation flag, which shows you if a record is currently valid or not. We also have type 1, type 2, and permanent column types. In type 1 are values that you don't really need to keep history on, so you override it. So if somebody's phone number changes and you really don't care to keep their old phone number, which is no longer valid, that's a good example of something that you would set as a type 1 value and you wouldn't worry about keeping history for it. Type 2, this is really what slowly changing dimensions is about, is type 2 values. We preserve the history. So if you're like have an employee table and you're keeping track of what department or what division they're in, you may want to keep track of that through history. So you'll basically have this marked as a type 2 and you'll be able to keep your history on it. And I'll kind of go over how that happens in the next slide or two. Permanent records never change, like birthday, what have you. Okay, so this is how Data Migrator would process these two records in initial load. Grab the employee, grab the name, grab the city. It'll load it into the target table. Since that table is set up for slowly changing dimensions, it will take or create a surrogate key for that and then populate everything else. So the key value, the SCD type, SCD type of 1 and SCD type 2 records will get written and they'll be all made active. Now, when you do subsequent loads, what you'll see is these two records are being processed and this name changed for this record. Well, when that name changed, it's an SCD type 1, so it's something where we're not trying to keep history for it. So it'll just literally write right over or update that record and keep that record active. Now, in this case, we had city set up as SCD type 2. The city changed from Redmond to Kirkland. We want to keep that history. So what happens is we take the previous record, we change the active flag from 1 to 0, and then we write a whole new record that looks the way the record should now.
Greg,
Yes, sir.
there is a question.
Shoot.
Take a look at it in the Q&A if you can, or
I wasn't able to see QA earlier, so I'm not sure if I can.
all right. So the person writes, I ran into an issue the other day where an integer column in SQL with a null value in it refused to update to a value of 0 via a flow updating with SCD. I could hard code a 1 and get the null to change to 1, but it would not update when I tried to make it 0. Have you ever seen that before?
What type was it?
It was type 1.
Uh, SCD1. It was a null, and you were trying to update that. I have not. If you, yeah. Um, Let me, especially since that's one that's, yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Um,
Could it be the null value had something?
well, well, that's what I was thinking. But if it's null and there was a where test on, well, if there was a where test against that value, then I could see it having a problem because it's a null value. It has no value. But just updating that based on something else, I'm not sure. Could it be? It depends on the SQL that it's creating in the background. If it's saying update where, well, but it's just updating that value. It's overwriting it. That shouldn't matter.
Okay,
I
do you want to have her put this on the survey, or do
Yeah,
you want,
definitely put that on the survey because that's
or
something
maybe a
I'm gonna.
case and
That's the thing
then
I'm
come
gonna.
through TSM?
Yeah, but both would be fine. Actually, if you open a case and put that on the survey, if you put it on the survey, I'll start looking at it. If you get a case out there, it'll get. I mean, unless Jared or whoever picks it up knows the answer off the top of their head. Um,
All right, so Jenny,
I
the
haven't seen
recommendation
this.
is open a case, and you might want to put a note on the evaluation,
Yeah,
and
put a
then
note on the evaluation because I
Rick
can
can look
start
at it a
looking
little
at it
closer.
immediately.
Yeah, but I'm definitely probably going to need more additional information.
Yeah, because that by itself doesn't. I've not seen that. That's all I can see. But thanks.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
we'll take a look. All right. Okay. So, how do you identify or how do you set something up in Data Migrator to be uh, to support slowly changing dimensions, and how do you make something a SCD1, SCD2 active flag or what have you? Well, you go on the synonym, and when you right click on the segment name, you have some options, one of which is to assign SCD columns. When you click on that, you're going to get a screen that looks like this. This one's already filled out. What you're going to have is every field that's available, and you can put them where they belong. In this case, sales rep was in the target table was set for the surrogate ID. Employee ID is the logical key. Oh, sorry. Uh, Active was set to the active flag. You have first name, last name, or type. First name, last name are type 1, which means they can be updated. We aren't keeping history, and then plant location and state is where we are keeping history. If you're using the DMC, if you look at the list tab, it tells you the SCD types. Oh, shows you the SCD types. All righty. Next thing I wanted to do is kind of show you a little slowly changing dimensions. Let's see. All right. Okay. This this flow is taking data from a DM sales table and populating it into into, I'm sorry, DM reps. So if we look at the data, in this case, we're going to be grabbing the plant location, the employee ID, and the sales rep, and that's pretty much it. If we look at the load options, we'll see that it's we're doing solely changing dimensions, and we're changing all rows. And if I sample the target, there's no data in the target currently. Okay. Okay, hold on. If we look at the master file for this, like I've shown in the presentation, go here and we have the assigned the SCD columns. Again, just we can either put them in or pull them out. I'm not going to do that. Get out of there. Okay. All right. Run this flow. It's going to take a second or two. There's a few records in here. Okay. Oh, two. So if I sample these records, as they came in, let's look at, see if we can find. All right, here we go. Wilson Fukushima. So they were the second record in the table. We processed multiple of these. If I'd have done it slower, we would have seen that this was originally set to the active record, but then the 24th record that was processed was this person too, and they changed from working in Boston to working in Dallas, and that one became the active record. So it keeps track of the history, and also will give you identify which record is the active record. And I think that is pretty much all I had to show. I'll start looking into that slowly changing dimensions, that issue you're running into. Actually, right after the call. That's all I got, Walter.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
So before I jump into the mainframe only part of the session, any comments? Any questions about anything we've done through the year? Except for designer, because Renee's not here. Okay. Before you go, please remember to fill out the surveys, the evaluations. We do look at them and take whatever recommendations you put in there, especially for future sessions. Again, we're in the process of getting ramped up to decide what we're going to talk about next year. So if there's something specific you want to hear about, let us know. If you're not on the mainframe or running Focus on the mainframe or Focus Studio, Feel free to drop off because you might not understand where I'm going to be going. Um, and happy holidays to everyone and happy new year, and we'll see you next year. For those of you on the mainframe, stick around and we'll start shortly. Bye. All right, I'm going to talk about now how to use IBI Focus and Focus Studio as a client to a reporting server. Okay, so why would you want to do that? I'm running Focus on the mainframe. I might have a reporting server that has access to a database in MySQL, in Oracle, and you want to incorporate some of that data in your query on the mainframe. So that would be a good example of why you would want to do this. So you have your mainframe, and nowadays they might not even be that big anymore. And we can talk to various servers. And in addition, reporting servers can talk to other reporting servers. Okay, so why local data access, offload processing? So how do we do this? We have two files that control the setup and connection to the sub. So in order to get to the remote server, those two files are the odin.cfg and the edit-sprof.prf. Now, these are reporting server file names, not necessarily focus file names. And you can see them if you look at your workspace on a server. Now, why am I showing this? Since I'm talking about Focus Studio, you have access to this tree in Focus Studio. You also should look at this tree when you're trying to get the information that you need to configure it in Focus and Focus Studio on the server. So in the Focus world, you're going to go to errors, and then the member name is going to be Odin, and then your FocProf. So Odin is Odin CFG, FocProf is edit-sprof. You also have edit-sprof if you're in one of the newer Focus versions, newer being 7.703 or higher. The member name in that case would be edit-sprof. So in your Odin, you're going to add a node configuration. So you're going to give it a node name. In this case, I'm calling the node equal to office. And that's going to basically be my connection name. And we're using TCP protocol, and it's a client, and I give it the host name. And that's where my reporting server lives. I give it the port of the reporting server and the HTTP port of the reporting server. And then in the edit-sprof config, we're going to have the connection. So I set the connection attributes, the node name / username and password that you're going to validate to your server. So in Focus Studio, I can click on Get Data in order to configure a remote server. Notice here I have remote servers under Connect to Data. If you don't see it there, then you have to look a little further down where you have the common adapt. Hit the plus, and then you should get a listing, and then you should see the remote servers in there. I already have some established, so this just allows me to add additional ones. So here I have two nodes set up, CMWinW and CMWinJ. These are both Windows servers. Again, you can call them whatever you want. In CMWin1, I fill out the information. If you don't see the information, if you're doing a new connection, it'll prompt, ask you for these values. If the connection already exists, you can right-click and do properties. So I have my node name. My host is the fully qualified host name, the port for the reporting server, the port for the HTTP listener. I'm using explicit security, and I'm signing in with my user ID and password. Okay. If you're going to a Windows server, you can also add the domain. Once you have everything set and you do configure, then you can right click on your connection, and then you have an option to do test remote server. And if everything looks good, you'll get a message saying remote server connection test connection was successful. In order to then use your remote connection, you're going to have to create a synonym, a master, and an access. So your synonym would be just like a regular synonym. You're going to have your segments and your fields and your alias, usage, and actual. But your suffix is going to be ETA, and that's going to trigger that this is going to a remote server. In the access file, you're going to have the segment name, and in this case, the table name is going to be ETA DBA, which is what we call the ETA connection on the remote server. And it's going to look for the car synonym, and then it's going to use the connection for Office. So in my example where I set up the two Windows servers, I had CMWinW, CMWinJ, so I would have one of those connection names. Now there is a way, or there's a way to do a create synonym, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to work when I'm going from Focus or Focus Studio into a reporting server. So I need to have the development team look at that and figure out why, because it should work. And that makes it a whole lot easier because I can just say create synonym, give it the local name, and then point to the remote synonym name and tell it it's DBMS of ETA. But until that's fixed, you're going to have to do this manually, but it's still doable. If you have a procedure, if you want to run your own code, ad hoc code, you can say remote dest equals connection name. So in our case, it would be CMWinW or CMWinJ or Office. I'm going to do a dash run because I want to run the remote destination so it's active. And then between the remote begin, remote end, I can put a remote query. So I can put a table request, I can put a define, I can put a whole chain of commands to create a report, and they will get run on the remote server. So everything between the remote begin, remote end will run remotely. Now be careful, because if I have a remote begin, but I don't have a remote end, you're going to get unpredictable results because we didn't know the passing. So if I do remote begin, question mark set print plus, remote end, then this will return the print plus setting value on the remote server. Table file car, sum the other cost by country, again, runs on the remote server. But what if I wanted to take the output of this report and do something with it? I want to incorporate it into some report I'm going to do on the mainframe. Well, what I could do then is put it to a hold file. So I get my 18 records, sum the other cost by country. I got my 5 records, and it will run the table request remotely and save the output to hold file hold 1. But do I have access to that now? Where is it being held? Well, because it's an on-table hold, the data is being held on the remote server. In order to transfer it across the wire, I then have to make this a PC hold. So PC hold, if you're used to running on a reporting server, you do your report, you do on-table PC hold, and it shows up in your browser. Well, if you're doing HubSub, if you're doing remote processing, the PC hold will also take the data and transfer it to the receiving, the calling client. So if I do remote begin, table file car, print by country, by car, by model, on table PC hold is hold 1, and then I do table file hold 1, then I will see the answer set that came from the reporting server. You can also do a remote execute fetch name, and the fetch name is local to the calling client. So this is something stored locally on your mainframe, but I want to run it on the remote server. So they'll take that FEX that's local, and then as if you did a dash remote begin, dash include FEX name, dash remote end. And that is all I have for Focus as a client. Any questions? So I see Lori put a thing in the chat wanting to know if anybody else is looking at Focus Studio. And I mentioned that because she has done a lot with Focus Studio. And we appreciate that. All right, any questions about anything? All right, you guys get to go a little early today, which is unusual. We usually go over. I want to again thank everybody for coming. Please remember to fill out the evaluations. Happy holidays, Happy New Year, and we'll see you again in January. And I believe those are available to register for. Would that be right, Shay? If you're listening. I know we sent her the beginning topics. I don't know if it's quite out there yet.
I'm sorry, Walter, repeat that.
Is the ability to register for January up yet, or?
Yes, guys, you can head out to the website and register for the January Focus Friday as well as February.
Woo! Thanks, Jay. All right. Thanks again for coming, and we're out.